Mr. Jason M. Craig is a husband, a father, he is a farmer, teacher, writer, and a raconteur. He is also the editor of Those Catholic Men and Sword&Spade magazine. Mr. Craig, welcome back to Vendée Radio.
It's good to be back. I enjoy coming back to your channel more than any other one I've been on in a while. So, hats off.
Thank you very much, Mr. Craig. I'm honoured you would say so. I think there are not enough YouTube videos, podcasts, broadcasts where you have shared your wisdom. The two that you recorded with Steve Cunningham on Census Fidelium are excellent listening that I would commend to our listeners as well, particularly on the nanny state. And I would also recommend Sword&Spade magazine. I'm a subscriber, and what really caught my attention recently was an excellent article that you penned called "Festivity is Not Partying," where you examine and contrast the occasion of the modern party as opposed to the Christian festival. So, Mr. Craig, could you please, well, I think this is germane, may I just say, because I don't know if you've noticed in the media some messaging about the onset of a Roaring Twenties decade. And it seems to be they're sort of programming people that for the eventual lifting of COVID restrictions to just run wild and have a decade of complete hedonism and abandon. So, Mr. Craig, could you please describe the difference between partying and festivity?
Well, one, that's an excellent proposition, and I have seen that almost a prophecy, a secular media-induced prophecy, that once we allow you outside again, because you're too stupid to make the decision, even though you have more data available than any other person in history, you're too stupid to make a decision on whether or not it's safe to go outside. But once we let you out there, you better party. Do you know why? Because this past year and a half or so has been awful. And the response to awful things is to party. And that's a good introduction to it's not my thesis, certainly, in that article. Most of what I'm drawing from is a very informative book. And it's a common thread in all of his writings, but Josef Pieper wrote a book called In Tune with Festivity. The subtitle is In Tune with the World. And he's trying to explain to us why we're unable to have, I mean, if you just look at paintings of Peter Bruegel or hear stories or consider how often the poor, miserable medieval peasant and his darkened intellect and Catholic tyranny, how often he had festive occasions and how happy he appeared to be in a lot of ways. He's trying to explain the difference, or really the heart of festivity, which is, in his words, an affirmation of reality. That festivity as a response. Why am I festive? I can't help it. That's why. It's the feeling you have on a day that's so beautiful and so good that even if it's Lent, I'm sorry, I know I gave up beer, but it's springtime. I cannot help while grilling these pork chops for my children to drink a beer. Where it's so good, you just can't help it. Versus partying, which is, life is so tedious and difficult, it must be balanced out with indulgence. Right? And that's, so as an anecdotal story of my own personal life, my family is, we in America are still suffering from the Puritans you people put over here. And They even claim all of American history as if America was born on Plymouth, forgetting Catholic California, Louisiana, and Florida. And Canada. But those Puritans, they land in one spot and think they own everything, but including the reality of our history. But anyway, those poor sullen people would view, and this is inherited in my own family, kind of puritanical fundamentalist South. When I converted to the Catholic Church, I will never forget my granny explaining to me why I became Catholic. And the reason was I could drink and party on Friday, confess on Saturday, and go to Mass on Sunday, and everything would be okay. And the background from my family is, and this is very common in the United States, that especially in the Baptist South, that your partying and your drinking is something you hide. There's so much shame in it, and there's just this common understanding that, yeah, you need to blow off a little steam every now and then, but that's essentially sinful. So she couldn't, in that article you mentioned, she would not be able to. I quoted, Hilar Belloc's famous stanza of, wherever the Catholic sun does shine, there's laughter, joy, and good red wine. At least I've always found it so. Benedicamos Domino. That the idea of Catholics, in her mind, Catholics were the ones that were able to both drink and go to Mass, right? So there was not a conflict in their embrace of good red wine and Belloc's and going to Mass. For her, there's a cognitive dissonance there, right? She can't grasp how we've been able to put those things together because they see it as conflict. So the main premise of that article is that partying is something we do as a response to reality, and the reality that we're responding to is that life is drudgery, that life is not worth affirming, that life is worth escaping. And we live our life because we have to, but we live ultimately for Friday. We're trying to get to Friday because at least we get one day, maybe two, if we don't intend to go to church or anything, to let off the steam, so to speak. And that's our reality. That is what partying is. Festivity, on the other hand, is what I describe as living from Sunday. And it's a very different, it looks very similar. All error looks very similar to truth, or it wouldn't be attractive, right? If you're the enemy of souls, you can't win people over with unattractive propositions. You got to make it look good. And partying looks a lot like festivity, but what it actually is a gaze into reality that despairs, that doesn't like what it sees, and the act of partying is a escape. The Catholic has no need to escape. His festivity, his true festivity, is when the reality of all of life actually bursts forth, right? And we have to have a moment to just respond more appropriately. That life is so good that I can't stop, the festivity from coming out every now and then.
Yes, one is profoundly Marian. Our Lady sings when she visits her cousin Elizabeth, "My soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Saviour." Whereas you say that partying attempts to suspend or escape reality through thumping music, pulsing lights, drugs and alcohol, sins of the flesh, to intentionally overwhelm and redirect the senses. So it's an attack on the intellect through the domination of the senses, the sensory appetite, and therefore reverses the work of grace. which is rightly orders the human constitution by subordinating the appetites to the intellect.
That explanation was so good. I want to burst into festivity right now. Yes, that's it. Because everything we know and we believe, it comes through the senses, right? So if what I know and believe is negative, I want to dull those senses. I'm sick of them. If everything I come to know and believe through the senses is good, I want to let the senses burst forth in song and dance and music. And that's a great difference. If you're trying to just come up with, the imaginings of how this is portrayed in probably your own imagination, especially due to maybe your own experience, but especially in, movies, parties happen in the shroud of darkness. It's almost completely rooted in, as you said, the dulling of sense. Even the light has to be dim, or it's a bad party. Whereas, just picture, and if you've ever seen a truly festive experience, even if there is things like the raising of the glass, it's in the daylight. There's wonderful things happening. There's dancing and there's singing, and there's genuine joy. And I'm speaking from someone who, as I'm a convert both to Christianity, if we want to say it broadly, but then, to the true faith as a Catholic, but in the younger years, being to many parties, they're really just around every nook and cranny of the party is acts of desperation and acts of violence. And, I took this out of the article. So here's exclusive content to Vendée Radio. At least I think I did. I will never forget being at a party and hearing, and these are one of those moments you remember where you realize what is happening. I'm being lied to, and this is bad, and I don't know how to, I didn't have the language or the guidance to know how to interpret this, but going to a party and hearing the victory chants of some boys cheering on the advances of another boy with a young girl. That was a semi-public event, and having my conscience alerted at that moment, but still feel like, okay, I guess this is how things are. I don't know. And going outside later and seeing the same girl broken in tears in a nook somewhere crying, and then hearing also people assuring her of how wonderful this party is. I know this is probably a graphic. We're getting outside of the abstract into an actual story, but this is important.
Yeah, it illustrates it, yeah.
And later, realizing it was just her and she was broken and weeping, and I had no idea how to comfort her. I mean, I don't remember the exact words, but just sat in silence, realizing that what's occurred that night, all of it, from the very beginning, has been bad, has been evil. Not having language of evil and good and bad, but just sensing it, sort of an inescapable reality of it. And that is the truth of partying, is that people are actually being destroyed. And it was only years later that I came to realize, because sometimes you have to put an actual label on something to realize its gravity. What everyone was cheering was rape. Everyone was cheering was rape. What she was mourning was a violation of her innocence. And the fact that there is the swirling of jackals laughing about the rape, and then her later weeping about the violation. I know that's very graphic, but that's what partying actually is. Life is terrible. Let's indulge if we destroy some things, so be it. Carpe diem, baby. Let's go. You know, that's the reality of the party, which is very different from festivity.
Yes, I'd like to get into Acedia, the sin at the root of this a bit later. The lust to annihilate, as R.J. Snell calls it in his book, Acedia and its discontents. But it's very acute what you say about the desperation within parties. For me, that resonated with experience in my own life of before returning to the faith, going to nightclubs and the awkwardness in the social interactions that was present early in the evening when people were still sober and still had kind of use of their intellectual faculties and were not able to actually converse because of the loudness of the music. And there's a kind of current there where you just have to sort of give yourself over to the frenzy and drink enough to not care anymore that you are not experiencing any form of convivium or connection or relationship. You just have to get with the beat of the music, which is pure rhythm. Melody, harmony are very much eclipsed, and the rhythm beats at whatever it is, 120 beats, which approximates sexual activity or aggravates the appetites. And the whole experience, as you write in your article, is one of looking to overwhelm or to negate reality itself. And I wanted to ask, it's in the disintegrating process of modernity, how was it that partying came to eclipse festivity?
I'm probably like you, feeling as if you lost something that you're never sure you really had.
Well, we were disinherited. Yeah. There was inheritance that was our birthright, and revolutionaries coordinated, planned, intentionally looked to undermine, subvert, and destroy Christian culture for their own private interests, maybe with direct communication with Satan and the fallen angels. And it didn't just happen.
Right. Because that would make it organic, right?
Yes.
Which is not, right? Which doesn't seem to make sense. I agree. So my sense is I know more of the puddles of the world and how they taste. But I've had enough of the spring water to know better at this point. Yet I think we younger generations that are attempting to embrace tradition, for example, are in an extremely awkward position of trying to live an inheritance that wasn't fully given to us, right? I mean, it's sort of the opposite of the prodigal son. Give me all my inheritance so I can go indulge in it. We're asking for it, and he's the one that squandered it. I mean, it's like we've got the prodigal father situation. So anyway, another episode. What happened to it though is that if the original premise, which I'm grasping from my own experience, but also having like all great, when you read Aquinas about justice and you go, wow, that's true. It's because you have seen or sensed justice somewhere else. So he's, helping you to understand what's true and real. That's what realism does. But anyway, what Pieper has helped us to see when he exposes the lies of, partying and festivity. And you mentioned Acedia, in R.J. Snell's excellent book. Also, Abbott Nault, N-A-U-L-T. Am I saying that right? You're an Englishman. That's
yes,
French.
I think so.
Okay. I have no problem being corrected as a Southern American by an Englishman about French. those books about Acedia, I think they accurately define modern man. And that has to do with, in a sense, if this was a, evolutionary or revolutionary process, that Acedia, the root sin that causes us to party, is the despair of reality. And it's not a form of despair of reality where you're unaware that you're called to something better or good or great. It's this despair of reality because you know you are. It's wishing you were called to less. It's wishing you didn't have the burden of humanity. And it's obvious summons to virtue and goodness and things that ants and bees and orangutans don't have, right? It's a wish that we could just be beasts on the island of Dr. Moreau, escaping his tyranny and indulging in whatever. It's a hatred of reality itself, right? So, not because you don't realize how great it is, but because you do, and you hate the summons to something bigger than yourself. You prefer not to be summoned to something like that. So that's the inspiration, and I think if we would understand it that way, and we should circle back because Acedia is very interesting. Also the noonday devil of that sin, that temptation. The early desert fathers said that that's the last temptation before you basically reach perfection. That once you can vanquish Acedia, you're there, brother. You got it. So we should pay attention to what they meant by that, and its possible relationship to technology and escapism. But when it comes to and nobody who's partying in high school or what, they're not aware that I'm refusing to affirm the goodness of reality and embrace the higher calling that's obviously intuited from my very humanity. They're not thinking of that, but they are taught that life is tedious, life is hard. You're going to climb the ladder to success, but on the way there, make sure you let off some steam because everything is like an engine, right? And you've got pressure and you've got release and there's inputs and there's outputs.
And everything's a fight. Everything's strike. It's this Hobbesian thing. You're not going to receive any gifts.
Everything's a fight. You mistrust anything you haven't worked for. You mistrust all gifts. It's salvation itself in Scripture is very, very, very often called an inheritance. Yet we disdain trust fund babies, right? We have a hatred of those that have received what they didn't deserve. Which is why, interestingly, us Americans, our skepticism of royalty, that you would be deserving of something by your birth, i.e., without any earning, without any effort, without any trial, that you'd be giving this unmerited gift, we have a hard time accepting, and we're wrong. Which is why we love books from C.S. Lewis to even if there's, I guarantee you if there's some homeschooling dads out there, they know the, what's the series a lot of people are reading? It's newer, Rabbits with Swords. I'm sorry, I can't recall. But if you look deeply at the most beloved stories that we have, do you know what's common in all of them? The children are unaware that they're actually royalty, right? So they are actually inheritors of this unmerited gift. And that's related. That's not esoteric. We have been given this gift, but how different it is. If everything, as you said, is a fight, life is a fight, then we just need to let off some steam, right? We just need to step out of the ring. If we're sons of a good father who has given us good things, and our job is to be faithful to them, well, that's in the era of I didn't earn it. I have to be responsible for it. Because just because you didn't earn it doesn't mean you're not responsible for it. And we don't want that responsibility. And that is a huge part of why we want to escape that responsibility.
That's fascinating. And you've illuminated me with an insight there, Mr. Craig. The Puritan spirit, the Calvinist Protestant spirit, which is the active ingredient in the American psyche, where through Calvin's predestination theology, work became a sacrament. and that I think is at root of the American meritocratic religion, and the distrust of aristocracy. Incidentally, the South is one of the only places in America where there was something approximating an organic aristocracy.
Absolutely. This was a place where kin and where you came from had some measure on your life, and the fact of where you came from had some measure of your future, that you were not unlimited in your potential. You actually were limited, and there's nothing bad about that. So it is in its worst iterations, people might say it's, tyrannical feudalism or something. But no, it was very much an understanding of different orders of society, and that it has nothing to do with what you earned.
Yes, a conception of the political community of society as a social organism, as a body, rather than as a mass of colliding atoms. So Pieper, to bring this back to your thesis, I by the way, I really like how you brought up the story of the prodigal son, because that, you write, encapsulates the difference between partying, which the younger son lives when he wastes his inheritance in riotous living, and festivity, which the father initiates on the son's return, and the difference there.
Without there's amazing how many instances in Scripture we don't realize. Wait a second, the son has a party, and he ends up with the swine, and the father appears to have a party, and he's like God, right? I mean, they both, and this goes into, in some of the translations, when it talks about the son leaving and using up the gifts that was given him, right? There's like this limited store of something, and he drains it and drinks it to the dregs, right? He gets all he can get out of it, and in that he's completely hedonistic. He's severed from where he came from. He's severed from his family. He's severed from his people. He's completely self-indulgent, even sexually, and he uses it up. He destroys the gift. And that's important. What we're saying is, if your response is reality is bad, do you know what you do to reality? You destroy it. And that's why, and this is, you don't have to, look, if anyone's feeling a little bit, intimidated by these philosophical terms, no. You know these words. You know that the tendency of the party is to destroy. This is why we use the language. What's a good party? When you get smashed, right? When you burn the house down. When, all of the language of parties is one of destruction.
Yes.
Man, I got really torn up last night. I can say the word. I was destroyed, right? And you would know. I could even borrow language that maybe isn't common or popular and say, I was dilapidated last night. It's like all these negative words. I got trashed last night. All of these words are destructive. Throw away, toss away, actively. That's all the language. So that's the prodigal son. He's using it up. And what's his reason for it? Right, his reason is the way he's perceiving how he is to live based on what he's received, right? So the question is, did he receive it accurately? Then you get the father, and he says, in the Ronald Knox translation, that he throws this party, kills the fatted calf, and he says to the servants, because we have good reason. So we're presuming that whatever festivity occurred, I know that they killed the fatted calf. They probably brought out the wine, the drinks, we know that he brought out great clothes, I'm sure. What's a good party if you're dressed like a bum, And what's the difference? Right? What is the difference between these two men partying, is that one is rejoicing in the goodness of his son's soul, the return of his son, the reuniting of a son with the gift of his inheritance, which was not just something to use up, but it was people and places and cultures. And it was the inheritance was more than the resources that he could use. And it wasn't until he returned to the integration of all those other things that then we have festivity, right? That's the festivity of heaven versus, and really, I mean, think of the what you described in the nightclub, you know, is that not, I mean, does it not sound, or even my story of this poor girl, does this not sound like hell? I mean, doesn't it just feel like that's some sort of foretaste of hell and we're under the delusion that it's enjoyable? Versus to feel, if you've ever felt this, to be in a room where you're being honored and you don't deserve it. You didn't clamor for attention. You didn't gain the praise of men. You're not being awarded for an accolade from your professional, you know, whatever. You're in the room and being rejoiced over because of who you are and that you are there. That is an affirmation of reality. And it's revealing, it's pulling back the veil. And if that's true, it's been true the whole time, and we just missed it. But in case we miss it, every now and then, you know what we have? In case we miss it, festivity, right? So it's when the veil is lifted in that moment.
The novelist, the writer Ernest Hemingway said that there is a sentence in the parable of the prodigal son which is the most beautiful sentence in all of literature. And that is verse 20. And rising up, he came to his father. And when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion, and running to him, fell upon his neck and kissed him.
Mm-hmm.
His father was looking for him.
Yeah. You have a book in front of you. I want you to quote, but you brought up Calvinism earlier, and we in the United States, especially that are Catholics, I mean, you poor English, you have your own set of challenges. The debate between things like faith and works become a lot simpler when we fully embrace the reality of God's paternity, his fatherhood, and the reality of our inheritance as sons. Because when we understand an inheritance, it's something you must receive and act upon. It makes the question of faith and works a little bit simpler because when I was amongst young, intelligent Calvinist sorts in the United States, I don't know how Calvinism is there, but it's like it's still, it kicks around here very well. The quip is, well, is God sovereign or is man? Is the
tulip?
That's the tulip total. I was a Calvinist, by the way. I don't know if I've ever revealed that to you. Before I was a Catholic, I was a tulip. 5 points of Calvinism, Calvinist. But how different it is when God actually is our Father, that giving us an inheritance makes it a complete, total gift, completely dependent on his goodness, and completely dependent on our response to it, i.e. our faith and the grace we received by it, and our works, our response to the faith. And I agree that is an illuminating piece of scripture, particularly if when our Lord tells us, when you pray our Father who art in heaven. And when, as St. Paul says, when the Holy Spirit is in us, what is it that we cry out? Abba, Father. And so in case you didn't get it when I said it, I'm going to send my Holy Spirit, and he's going to make you say it. Call out to the Father. And when it comes to this topic of festivity, Just imagine, just let yourself feel the thought of your father running to embrace you after being lost and then throwing a party just because of who you are, that you're there. You didn't achieve anything. I mean, the prodigal son returning. What has he achieved? What accolades can they really put pinned to his chest, which is the annoyance of the second brother, right? What does this guy do? But that is a beautiful, that's the key to the festivity is, this is reality itself, and this is too good. This is too good. Kill that calf. Kill that fat calf out back, you know? I actually have fat calves right there. I wish you could see them.
Are they hiding away now?
Well, we killed a fatted, well, I thought he was a steer. He turned out to be a bull, and if you don't know what that means, we'll explain that on another, but we killed him last week. But it's all the girls out there now.
It's going to keep you going for the next few months.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting colloquium between the late Sir Roger Scruton, God rest his soul, and Dr. Jordan Peterson. And they discuss the heavy metal concerts and the phenomenon of the mosh pit. And Peterson says, isn't this encouraging? Isn't this good, actually? Because you've got a togetherness there, and they're like ants in a frying pan. They're all dancing together, and there's connection. There's a form of communion. And Sir Roger Scruton replies, no, they're not dancing with each other. They're dancing against each other. And that, I think, well, Pieper defines festivity as the celebration of existence under the form of various symbols and rites. The festival flows from the common vision of a people. And thus, when we talk about the disintegration of modernity, a change in the religious vision of culture results in the change of the festival. And the loss of a common faith, the destruction of organic society, community, eventually the family, has led to this mass. Pope Leo XIII talks about the distinction between a people, an organic people, and an artificial mass. And that then coalesces, and you see it being coterminous with, for example, the abandonment of the pursuit of truth as one of the purposes of the university. Coincidental to that is you have the college party. That's not a coincidence. Those two things are connected. So how is boredom more generally a phenomenon of modernity? With Thomas Aquinas describing sloth, Acedia, as a sad rejection of loving, intimate union with the Creator.
It's interesting that you related your comments about the university in relation to, these are young people in formation for society, right? And for their own sake, yes, but also for the sake of their, quote unquote contribution. Yeah, it's also the place of the party itself. I mean, that's the quintessential. It's really disgusting. Those of us who have actually experienced the underbelly of party life and college life or high school life or middle school life, that the destruction that's actually there and how much pain and hurt. It's almost as if you're learning that that's part of the navigating of life, of being used, abused, and learning how to dominate and be passive or whatever. But anyway, the relationship of those things, because they have to balance out the reality of the drudgery of something like education, right? It's not the expanding of the soul, it's the necessary initiation into, the upward mobility of leaving your inheritance so that you can get rich. And boredom. That I don't know if this is common. I mean, this was common. I'm not that old. I'm in my mid-30s. Let's not be, cloakish about it. This is what I am. I don't think our faces show on your radio, so maybe I sounded older and wiser, but I'm not. But even as a kid, and then now, whether it's in the news or just talking to, you know, teenagers or young adults, and that question of when something bad occurs and something evil, maybe even, why did you do that? And the answer of, because I was bored. Something in it that if people are not horrified by that, not horrified by the right things, they're probably more scared of a barely lethal virus. The idea that our teenagers are destroying the reality around them, of doing something destructive and painful because they were bored, is horrifying reality. We have to just, if we could stop right now and turn your YouTube channel off, but that would be dangerous, right? Because then we would lose viewers and they would go on to somewhere else. So let's keep them hooked here, because we don't want them to be bored, right? Because if we're bored, there's a great, you know, the whole, the sinner and the idle hands and all that, but really, and I know this feeling of despair within me, there was a time of particular despair in my life where I stole are we allowed to share? We can share such things, right? Personal stories.
Yes, certainly, yes. St. Augustine did in the Confessions.
That's right.
That's where it started, stealing a pear from the orchard, wasn't it?
That's right. I stole a construction lift. And I think, if I understand correctly, you people over there call elevators by the word lift. I don't mean that. I mean a lift is a construction, you know, it lifts you up in the air.
Like
outside.
A cherry picker.
A what?
A cherry picker? A kind of concertinaed...
Yes.
I know what you mean, yeah.
A cherry picker. Oh. Okay. Well, we'll call it a lift. A cherry picker. I stole one, and I went around a shopping center at night, and I destroyed all of the lights in the parking lot. Do you know why? Because I was bored. But it was also a time of a sense of despair. So, anyway, the relationship of boredom is unique to our Western society. It's something that would be hard to explain to healthy societies and children that are healthy. You know, here in America, we have the rebuke of the Amish, as Wendell Berry calls it. The problem with the Amish is that they exist. And the bigger problem is that they are cohesive, integrated, consistent, and seem to be relatively happy. They seem to embody everything that we've lost, even while they also embody everything we make fun of, which is being backwards and a lack of progress. And we make fun of them, but the problem is they're still there. They're not an idea and an abstract we can talk about. They're there, and they're annoying. But you know what they don't have? They're not bored. They literally can't understand the idea of being bored. Yet they also have no electronics. They have no media. They have nothing like that. How is it that if anyone in the world should be bored, shouldn't it be them? But they're our rebuke. And, you know, there's some right down the road from me. I don't know them well, but I know them well enough that they have something I don't have. And there's something I might have a little bit of, is boredom. So they are in closer touch with reality. So that leads me to believe, one, boredom induces us to partying. Boredom induces us to destruction. Boredom induces us to violence. And we have not even begun. I don't know if they're releasing the data for you to see or not there, under the poor English tyranny that we shook off centuries ago, that you still live under. But that was a jab at you. I hope you're not offended by it. The reality of...
We were invading your Capitol building before it was cool. Doing it properly.
Oh, you can have it. You can have it. The number of teenage suicides right now is so startling that I have is a strong suspicion that the numbers will be somehow hidden from us.
Yes.
If not by the fact that we can't politely discuss it, because that would mean that we would have to admit that in the last year of 2020 and 2021 that we made the wrong decisions that induced our own children to a state of despair such that life had to be ended by their own hands. I don't think we have the stomach to acknowledge the truth of that, so we won't hear about it. But the numbers as of now, you can see them. They're and those that are on the front line and trying to help these kind of things see it. So what have they been locked inside with that causes despair? They have had everything that we extol as liberating and amusing, which is essentially technology. So if we're going full circle now to where we began, that festivity is the normal response to actually perceiving the truth of reality. That festivity is a distortion and actually a disconnection of reality, a disintegration, which is why it's destructive. We have now locked our children away from reality, which is persons, nature, sickness even, and we are now surprised that they're dying of self-murder and despair. The destructive character of boredom turned inward. I mean, there's not a significant, well, I'm sorry, there is a significant difference, but there is a connection between my stupidity of being very sad and stealing a construction equipment to break lights and that boredom to someone who is totally overwhelmed by that because the reality is forcing them. Just imagine someone in their room and just picture that the walls actually are crushing them. You know, that they're slowly imploding because of being severed from reality. That's boredom. So in case anyone began this thinking that boredom is just, there is no boredom in healthy humanity. That is and I think I quote this in the article, but I got it from the book. I think I see it on your desk, R.J. Snell. Boredom is a Western construct. It's a post-enlightenment, just like adolescence. So first we invent adolescence, then we invent boredom, and we put the two together, and now we have our own children killing themselves. Is there ever a sign of the death of a society than the sign of hope, which is youth, committing the ultimate prophecy of despair, which is suicide? But I don't think we're coming to grips with that. Anyway, all of these things are so intimately related, we probably won't talk about them because they're the same problem. And I think for us Catholics, and if we're coming back around to like, so what? Sometimes, I think we were sharing before, I think you hit the record button. I'm so sick of it all. So what do we have left? What do we do? And we're recording this during Lent. I can't wait for Easter because I'm going to have a frickin' festival. And the rebellion of our joy, right? I think if we can return to the Father, we're not going to be able to drum up a good festival. But if we start going in His direction, and Easter, facing Him, by the way, hint, hint, then I think He'll meet us halfway and throw a pretty decent party. So if we're going to escape our despair, we've got to just start running in the right direction. And it sure isn't in our rooms alone with our devices.
Yes, gazing at the feed of the swine. And when we survey post-modernity, I'm reminded of Macbeth. Confusion now hath made his masterpiece. Post-modernity, Satan hath made his masterpiece. Something my friend Dr. Jesse Russell said in a previous broadcast. We don't realise how far we're gone, how dark things are. I'm not counselling despair or anything like that, but
No, but you mentioned
The,
Tolkien earlier. That it's okay to say we're suffering a long defeat, but
yes,
that we're not losing hope, right?
exactly, yes. And above the clouds rides the sun, as Samwise notices. But the crisis of modernity, of postmodernity, has often been described as a crisis of the intellect. No doubt that is at the heart of this. The the rejection of objectivity with subjectivity in place of subjectivity. But it's also a crisis of the will. Today we see this deep, late civilizational exhaustion. And you mentioned last year's COVID event. I think that is such a manifestation of it because in this country, for a whole year, the government has said you cannot see your loved ones. And in response to a disease with a 99.74% survival rate, of those 0.26%, 90% have comorbidities. There, no danger to the young. And in response to that, people just shrug and just go, okay, and I'll just watch Netflix at home and take my my government largesse, my furlough payments. We set before ourselves, as you say, the phenomenon of the self-murder of youth, truly an indictment of our societies. We set before them what are the models that we give them. For girls, it is this prostitute type to be an Instagram whore, and for boys, it is the video gamer, the effeminate, the pornographic male. I don't know. It's the inversion of masculinity. Acedia is really at the heart of this, as you say. So I guess you mentioned the Amish, and this is a big question. But it is, to what extent is technology redeemable? Because we often people, when people raise these issues, such as Dr. John Senior, who we both consider ourselves disciples, I think, we are accused as being Luddites or as wanting to be like the Amish, to turn back the clock. We have not had a saint who's shown us how to virtuously use the internet. It's so, there's a question of proportionality to our human faculties, to our human constitution, the aggravation of the notifications on the smartphone, the agitation of the humdrum of city traffic, of drones, of instant Amazon deliveries, all these things. Who is to say that actually in a future Christendom, all of these things would have to be destroyed to an extent? Because just like King Oswald of Northumbria celebrated his baptism by riding around his kingdom and smashing all the idols of the pagan gods with a hammer, so perhaps in a future Christendom, we would have to smash the internet and television. Perhaps you cannot have an organic community with those things. I don't know. I'm just proffering these questions. Catholics are not grappling with, or not sufficiently grappling with them yet, I think.
No, we're too busy trying to get people off porn to talk about the fact of the screen itself.
Yes.
And I'm with you. And that is the tension. And doesn't it always come back to that? The tension. And there's something anti-Christological about it, right? There's something related to the Antichrist here that, we've said, or, I said it earlier, the idea of the Father rejoicing over us and us running towards him, that us embracing our inheritance of being sons is the answer, right? Of properly receiving and responding to the gift of reality, of our own tradition. And the Antichrist is anti-son, necessarily. He erases identity, whereas in Revelation we hear that God has a special name for us that we haven't even heard yet, right? And the name is a matter of relationship. The Antichrist assigns us numbers. And it says very clearly, this is not sensational. The Antichrist assigns us numbers for a primary reason of buying and selling. so that we can continue to participate in the economy while our identities, both with each other and with God, are erased. So there's something very alluring about the Antichrist and this, the so-called spirit of the Antichrist. It's alluring. And I can't help but think that there's something about this entire techno world, and I'm so reluctant to bring it up because people, scoff immediately because, oh no, these are helpful tools, but it makes total sense. It is very hard for Eve to recognize when the devil says, if you eat this, you will be like God. And St. John the Apostle, the evangelist, also says, one day we will be like God. There's a very amazing subtle difference in the lies of grasping and receiving. And there's something that we are unable to receive in the technological order, or at least something that we miss, that I haven't put my finger on, and I don't think I don't have the capability of, but I do have a fear of it. And we could get even more sensational that, one Hebrew, a way to interpret, www in Hebrew, it would be 666. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but there's something about this order of things that detaches us from reality while attaching us to reality at the same time. This paradoxical confusion that is obviously, in my mind, it's obviously a source. My wife and I, the fact that we're deliberating over how to escape Amazon while still providing the things we need out in rural North Carolina, lest anyone be have too romantic a view of our life. We have Amazon Prime trucks crawling around this place that I have a horror of them, to be honest. But there is something to this, and to our boredom, into our acedia, into our self-murder, and into our need to party, to ignore it all, and our inability to join together in just normal, unadulterated, unmerited, unearned festivity. That the only two things that I can see clearly, I don't know the response to these things. We're waxing and waning here. But the two responses seem to be orient towards the liturgy and the truth that flows from it, and turn shit off, right? I mean, John Sr. and the death of Christian culture and the restoration of Christian culture. The amount of times he says "smash your television," he was a prophet in the 80s.
Yes. So I was going to say his program is not only negative, it is also positive. He prescribes, as you say, smashing the television. Today he would say smash the smartphone. And then he says, play the piano with your family, build a fire, paint art, make music. Sorry.
Yeah. No, but that's the hilarious thing. I don't know if you've gotten the latest issue of Sword&Spade. You live really far away. We have some controversies about the United States mail right now. I don't know if you've received it yet. But because they lose billions of dollars a year, and Trump tried to fix that. That's another story. But there was a man, we published an article. He wrote an article. He was a father in the 80s and 90s who smashed his television. And his story of what happened in his family. We've gotten more email about that. And the article I had on retirement, that was a strange, touchy nerve people had about saving for retirement and all that. But this article about how he did this in the late 80s and how he recognized a threat that most of us didn't see. I was still laughing at The Simpsons in the early 90s because they're hilarious. He recognized something and smashed it. I wonder now when we're going to learn our lesson. I mean, engage in the smashing enterprise. So maybe we've been talking about in this podcast. We're coming up. I've got 2 minutes here, but we've been talking about how we're induced to destruction of reality. It seems that perhaps you and I need to start talking about what we're going to destroy in order to reach reality. And it has very much to do with, sadly, probably the device that's bringing us together right now. But also, obviously, there's some sort of order of creation in life that we're being separated from. So we're never going to be a festive people until we have as the book that inspired this whole conversation, unless we're in tune with the world as it is, as created, as given to us by a loving Father, unless we're in tune with that, we'll just be stuck with partying and suicide.
We're all shipwrecked and we're all sick.
That's a good word.
Part of the remedy of this, as you say, well, the heart, it's ora et labora, it's the holy sacrifice of the Mass, and the remedy is an observation of the third commandment. You've reminded me, I'll send you an article after this, a really excellent article that draws from the memoirs of Maria von Trapp, from the Trapp family singers. And obviously their real story is far more Catholic than the Hollywood adaptation. But there's a chapter in there regarding Sunday, the land without a Sunday, it's called. And it compares the Sundays as observed in Bolshevik Russia, the Sunday in the capitalist, consumerist, frenetic United States, and then the Sunday in pre-war Catholic Austria. And it's really, really fascinating because they observed all three of them. And so, yes, I will send that to you afterwards.
I'll read it. We'll gather back together for another conversation.
Yes, I would be most honored, Mr. Craig. Thank you very much for your erudition. Thank you for your thoughts today. And I will put a link to Sword&Spade magazine. Heartily recommend all of our listeners subscribe.
Thank you again. Talk to you next time.
Thank you. God bless.